Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to another episode, and welcome back to the next in this AMA series. And we're now doing these once a month, and as always, my partner in crime for these AMAs is Dr. Etty Ben Simone. Etty, welcome back.
Hello, sleep fans. Happy to be here.
So let us just dive in for those fans. And you have, I think, a number of different questions for me. I will try to do a better job at not meandering and having polluted streams of consciousness that go all over the place. I will stay focused as best I can. And if you can microphone slap me when I don't, that would be
Microphone slap.
very kind. Yes, you get the picture. Please keep me on track. So, to our first question, what is the first AMA question?
We've had really great questions. And the first topic that I want to ask you about is sleep and pregnancy. And
Mm,
especially, how does lack of sleep affect someone who's pregnant, both during pregnancy and after the baby is born? And
okay.
people are also asking if being constantly woken up during pregnancy does it serve to get the body used to the lack of sleep after the baby is born? So sort of uh,
Yeah.
practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
And the last part of the question is why is prolactin released mostly during the night?
Gosh, some interesting questions there, particularly the second one, which is a theory that was or has been knocking around, and I'll get to it, which is could this persistent awakening at night and this essentially what is persistent chronic sleep restriction serve as a way to train a brain, and particularly the brain of a mother or father, and help them with some of that. So I will get to that. That is an interesting theory that's been out there. But let me pull back. Firstly, the question, how does sleep affect both a woman during pregnancy and during the postnatal period? Pregnancy is, of course, it's a transformational experience, and it brings about some rather profound physiological, hormonal, and emotional changes. There is a very large literature now in the sleep science world that has demonstrated, perhaps unsurprisingly to the first part of the question, that sleep disturbances are common both during pregnancy and during that postnatal period. But what many people may not know is that there are various implications of that sleep disruption profile, not only for the mother, but also for the baby. I will try to walk through these in my mind and structure it in a way that's meaningful. I'll start with the effects of a lack of sleep during pregnancy, and then I'll come on to the postnatal period. Before I speak about the consequences, I'll start with what we've discovered regarding the reasons why we see sleep disturbances to begin with during pregnancy. So, why should a mother, as she is pregnant, how best can she understand the reasons as to why that sleep is so difficult? Some of them will be obvious, some not so obvious. I think there are probably at least three different reasons. The first is just the physical discomfort of the body's physical change in form and the obviousness of how that body change makes sleep such a challenge. The second concerns some quite potent hormonal changes. And then the third comes on to frequent urination. The issue of frequent urination can be perplexing to people. And it's not just a result, and perhaps if I were to say, when a woman is pregnant, why do you think that there would be more frequent urination, including at night? Perhaps the obvious answer would be, well, it's because of the increased bladder pressure caused by the growing fetus. But it also relates to some of those hormonal changes that I spoke about as the second of the three reasons. Obviously, the first, physical discomfort, the second, hormonal changes, the third, urination frequency. Those three things are the things that cause the most sleep disruption in pregnancy. And The issue of urination or more frequent urination, I've always found quite fascinating. I remember back when I was at Queen's Medical Centre in the UK, back as a young man, just being so interested by how this can take place outside of that obvious physicality, the mechanical pressure of it. And there's probably at least 4 or 5 different reasons that that increased urination frequency occurs during pregnancy. The first is that there is increased blood volume and therefore kidney activity. So during pregnancy, a woman's body will experience an increase in blood volume. And because that enhances certain aspects of kidney function, it can lead to more fluid being processed and directed towards the bladder. And therefore, that is one of the reasons why you get increased urination frequency. So I guess the crass analogy would be it's a little bit like turning on the tap handle of the water supply, and that increases because of that change in blood volume, leading to changes in kidney function, which lead to more fluid being processed. The second relates to hormonal changes. And here, for the urination frequency part of the sleep disturbance story in pregnancy, and I'm going to keep trying to pull myself back to this, one of the hormones in particular is something called HCG, and this increases during pregnancy. It stands for human chorionic gonadotropin. And that increased release of HG, and by the way, it's a small h, capital C, capital G. So HCG, it can it's almost like recalibrating the bladder activity, and it will produce more frequent urination as a consequence as it increases in its activity. So, what would be a good analogy? It's probably a little bit like adjusting the thermostat in your home for heating and turning it to a lower threshold, meaning that the heat turns on more frequently because there has been a recalibration of the thermostat. And so, therefore, the heat will stay on longer because the temperature at which it is meant to start heating is now at a lower level. And in some ways, that's how HCG does its work to increase urination, particularly at night during pregnancy, which is that it resets that thermostatic threshold, as it were, in the bladder, and therefore promotes more switching on of urination frequency. That's probably a terrible analogy.
That's the hormone that is being detected by home pregnancy tests. So it starts being
Correct.
released, around week 6. And there are specific kits that can detect it. And that's how someone can know they're pregnant.
And that's in part why some of that urination frequency increase during pregnancy happens as one of the earliest features. A woman will start to notice that really quite early on because HGC is coming online quite early during the pregnancy phase. That's why it's used in part as a detection tool. The third, I think I said there's 4 or 5. The third is the increased pressure on the bladder, and that is back to the mechanical pressure. So much like the fetus acting like a balloon that's expanding and in a very confined space, and the bladder gets pushed, and therefore the bladder's capacity is pressed upon, as it were, and that necessitates more frequent bathroom visits throughout the night. Another aspect comes on to bladder control. Some of the hormonal changes that happen during pregnancy will change almost the physical elasticity, the stretching of the pelvic floor, and that stretching of the pelvic floor will weaken it. And so it's a little bit akin to stretching a piece of tissue and constantly pushing more and more force on it. And therefore, that stretch on the pelvic floor decreases overall bladder control. And therefore, that sense, oh my goodness, I think I need to go to the toilet again, will increase because there is a decrease in overall bladder control. And then finally, is just a simple increase in the flow of urine. And urine production is upscaled during pregnancy. Why is it upscaled during pregnancy? Well, in part, it's a means of efficient elimination of waste. Why would urine need to be increased in its production? Well, because you're now waste excreting, not just for yourself, but yourself and your growing baby. So, mother and fetus need to have a cleansing of the waste material. And so, urine production is upscaled in proportional response to the needs of the combined two entities, two organisms.
You just have
So,
to ask your baby not to pee during the night. If you don't mind being a bit more considerate.
yeah, could you send that text message to my child, please, Dr. Walker? So, there can be pregnancy related sleep disruptions, as I described. And I think this comes on to another part of the question, which is what does that mean for consequences? Does that have any consequences? Well, there are, of course, some immediate consequences of the sleep disruption for a mother who is pregnant, and also perhaps some effects that can last a little bit longer. One of the features that we do see is, of course, mood disorders during pregnancy. Sleep disturbances do contribute very understandably to certain changes in moods, and mood can be more dysregulated. Some people would describe that more of swings in moods. It can lead to irritability, and it can also lead to higher rates of depression. And there've been lots of studies out there. I think there was probably one of the pioneering studies was by Field and colleagues, gosh, back in mid 2000s maybe. And they found that sleep disturbances in pregnant women correlated with increased depressive symptoms. And specifically, I think about 73% of pregnant females with sleep problems had depression relative to pregnant women who did not have sleep problems. So, pregnant women who are suffering with their sleep are also those who seem to have a significantly higher risk of depression. And we think in part it could be a link, a causal link, because we know that there is causal evidence now linking a lack of sleep to depression. So that's one of the first consequences. So I've spoken about that there are sleep disruption issues during pregnancy, why those issues occur, and some of the mechanisms. And now we're speaking about maybe some of the consequences. We've spoken about depression. It's also interesting that sleep disruption during pregnancy, and the severity more specifically, because almost every woman is going to have trouble with sleep during pregnancy. But if you rate the severity of the sleep disruption during pregnancy, it has been associated, and again, this is not causal evidence, it's simply correlational, but it has been associated with an increased risk of prolonged labor and specific birth interventions. And what do I mean by that? I mean things like cesarean deliveries. And so there've been some work demonstrating that women with the most severe sleep disturbances relative to those with the least severe sleep disturbances during pregnancy are far more likely, I think they were actually twice as likely to have or require the need for cesarean delivery compared to those, as I said, with mild sleep disruption. Perhaps no surprise also is, and we've spoken about this a number of times on the show, when your sleep gets disrupted and it gets short, or your sleep is of low quality, your body isn't as good at regulating your blood sugar levels. In other words, your blood glucose levels. What we found is that sleep disturbance during pregnancy is linked to an elevated risk of what we call gestational diabetes. And the greater the severity of that sleep loss, the greater the risk of gestational diabetes during pregnancy. And I think there was findings that I think it was actually a very, was it the field? It was another study that came a few years later, and I'm blanking. But what they were finding, I remember the numbers, but they were finding that pregnant women who were sleeping less than 5 hours of sleep, and I think it was somewhere around about 4 hours of sleep was the mean, had almost a five-fold greater risk of gestational diabetes relative to those who were sleeping more than 5 hours. And so, again, that is not causal evidence, that's simply categorical. We're bucketing individuals into those who have not good sleep as a consequence of pregnancy, very short sleep, and those who have not as short sleep. And those who had short sleep had over a five times increased risk of developing gestational diabetes.
That's a huge risk.
And it's a huge, huge risk. Essentially, that would be like saying it's a 500% increased risk. 30% or 50% increased risk is significant, but five-fold risk. Again, that is simply associational, doesn't mean it's causal. So those are some of the immediate links regarding pregnancy. Let me now speak a little bit about the postnatal period of time. Postnatal, by the way, refers to after birth, postnatally. And here we often see sleep disruption continuing. In part, that's because of the baby's erratic sleep schedule. It knows nothing about this wonderful thing called a circadian rhythm at that point. In the first couple of months of life, the circadian rhythm is not yet glued into the neural architecture of the brain. It usually starts to beat out its 24-hour rhythm, usually at around 6 months-ish, and things start to come online and things get better. So it's not just the erratic sleep of the baby, which of course then changes the sleep schedule of the mother. It changes the schedule of the feedings. We've also discovered that there are some other sleep concerns or issues, but just perhaps for time's sake, let me speak a little bit about the implications of the sleep impairment. Postpartum depression, as I said, there can be depression that occurs during pregnancy because of the disruption of sleep, but also because of the continued disruption of sleep. There can be postpartum depression, and there are very strong links there that females who postpartum who have insomnia are about twice as likely to be diagnosed with depression. There can also be, though, interestingly, some cognitive impairment, that the sleep deprivation that comes postnatally can affect issues such as memory function. And there can be what we call lapses in memory, where people can temporarily have problems accessing memories that they may remember later. So it's not as though the memory has disappeared. It's just that they've lost the accessibility to a nevertheless available memory that's there. So a difficulty in retrieving the IP address of the memory. And then, of course, attention is also reduced, and ability to focus, which can be a problem. And I suspect for pregnant women or women who have gone through pregnancy and the postpartum period, all of those sound probably very familiar. So that's, I think, the first question. The second question, Etty, was related to this theory of, was it that the frequent
Yeah,
waking up during the night,
kind of
almost like,
prepares you.
yeah, not like sleep training for a baby, but it's actually sleep training for the parent. Is that sort of was that the second
Yeah, yeah.
question?
Being woken up so frequently during pregnancy sort of prepares you to what's coming up.
Yeah, so it has been a theory, and it is a theory that has largely been debunked, that this popular, or it was once a popular notion, that the frequent awakenings that occur during pregnancy in some way serve a purpose of preparing a mother for the postnatal sleep deprivation that they will undergo. And it sounds logical, but if you search the literature, there is limited, if any, support for that theory. So sorry, but I have to debunk that myth.
Yeah, I think in general, we don't really find evidence of biology trying to minimize or ruin sleep in favor of any benefit that would come out of it, right? I don't think
No,
of
it's
any.
it's very rare indeed. One of the two circumstances I can mention in biology in which we see the brain deliberately depriving itself of sleep are, firstly, when an animal is forced to undergo conditions of starvation. At that point, it starts to selectively restrict sleep, not completely deprive it, but itself of sleep, but it will start to stay awake for longer. It will sleep less, i.e., sleep restriction. Why? Because there is a signal of starvation going to the brain, and the brain says, okay, I need more time to forage in a larger perimeter because my current perimeter is not providing me with food. And if I don't do something quickly, I'm going to die. And so therefore, it's one of the very extreme circumstances where the brain, it won't completely deprive that organism of the sleep that it needs, but it will at least limit it. So that's, I suppose, a sort of a slightly diluted version of that. The other place we do see it in the extreme, total sleep deprivation, it seems, is in some species in which they are caring for their young. And a good demonstration of this is in killer whales. When a mother is ready to give birth to a new killer whale baby, it will leave the pod, the group of killer whales that it normally schools with, and it will go off to a different location. It will give birth to its young killer whale calf. And then that is the time of highest jeopardy for the young infant calf to be eaten and killed. And as a consequence, the mother will undergo long stretches of total sleep deprivation, keeping vigilant watch over her calf as they are making the trek back to the safety of the pod. So those are two extreme circumstances where there is life preservation after there has been reproductive passing on of genes. You could argue from a purely ruthless biological perspective that success has been made in terms of passing on the genetic legacy. So now mother is perhaps more disposable in that ruthless biological way. And I don't wish to think like that, but you can argue maybe that's in part the reason that then evolution has said, well, normally sleep is non-negotiable, absolutely essential. But in this circumstance, it's perhaps even more important to keep the new birthed genetic legacy alive, and therefore the older guard in terms of genetic legacy can perhaps undergo sleep deprivation to protect that genetic legacy. So that's, gosh, I've completely drifted on. And I know there's a third part of the question, which I think I've forgotten a little. Oh, it's prolactin, wasn't it?
Prolactin.
Okay,
Yeah,
gosh.
I loved your Hunger Game version of evolution.
Oh, God, it's
I
terrible.
totally agree, actually.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Dr. Doom and Gloom.
Dr. Doom
This
and
is
Gloom.
Matt Walker. So let me come on to the last question, which relates to hormones and one hormone in particular. The body, of course, undergoes some really quite dramatic hormonal changes during pregnancy, and those changes hormonally, several of them actually, in fact, affect sleep. One of them, which is not prolactin, but I should probably mention, is something called progesterone. And progesterone can have a sedative effect on sleep. And we've spoken about this a little bit before on the topic of sleep and sex, I think. And its levels of progesterone decrease postpartum. And that decrease in a sleep promoting hormone, progesterone, we think may contribute to the sleep disturbances that I mentioned before that occur during the postpartum period. I will just mention that because I think it's important because it does come on to what I skipped over before, where I was saying, well, I should not spend some time on the reasons why there's postpartum sleep problems. I'll just come on to the consequences, but there is one of the reasons, several. Okay, but let me come on to prolactin and the timing of prolactin release. Prolactin is essential for milk production. And as I am always telling everyone at the Sleep Center, much to their chagrin, just like on this podcast, we love words and we love to break them down to understand what they mean. Etty, prolactin?
Prolactin. So, lactin, like lactate, is actually milk. So, it's very easy to remember. Pro milk hormone helps with the milk production.
So, prolactin, the enhanced production of milk. We see highest levels of prolactin release occurring during the night and during those early morning periods. The nighttime peak in prolactin is actually quite interesting. It's fascinating. And again, I remember learning about this back at Queen's Medical Center in the UK. There is an inverse relationship between prolactin and dopamine, it seems, within the context of the postnatal period, where dopamine will inhibit prolactin release, which is an aside that I don't know is very helpful. But coming back to the question, what we believe is that the nocturnal rise in prolactin promotes breastfeeding, which can be both beneficial for the mother and the baby. So the act of breastfeeding stimulates then more prolactin production, and that prolactin can also have a sleep promoting benefit. So, prolactin, just like progesterone, does seem to have a sleep enhancing feature to it. And what we're saying is that it's produced increasingly at night. And when it's produced at night, when baby is waking up, which is when mother needs to try to get back to sleep as much, not only does the baby's feeding caused by the increased prolactin at night help the baby to feed throughout the night, but the increase in the prolactin at night can conversely help the mother and help the mother during this tough period try to get back to sleep because of the frequent awakenings that will occur. So, in some ways, this is actually the opposite of what we've just discussed, Etty, which
Yeah,
is here is
evolution is coming.
biology,
Yeah.
is trying to do the exact opposite of deprive a mother of sleep. It's just saying, my goodness, I know that we have to do this, and it is an essential part of developing the next generation. But my goodness, as part of this intricate dance of hormonal changes, I'm going to have a feedback bonus that not only does the prolactin help with the production of milk to feed the young infant at night, it's also going to help you, the mother, to try to get back to sleep. Gosh, biology is wonderful, isn't it? And sleep is just amazing. Gosh.
Wonderful and occasionally kind.
And occasionally kind, unlike to a killer whale mother who is desperately sleep deprived.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. I'm trying to I think I did a little bit better relative to all of the other AMAs there. I think I was not quite as meandering, Matthew, as I normally am.
You did so well.
A partner of today's podcast is an alternative to coffee that I've been using myself. As I think I've probably mentioned on this podcast before, I am one of the individuals who is quite sensitive to caffeine based on my genetics, but I still like a similar beverage jumpstart to each day, and I do get sort of sleep inertia, and it's nice to have something that can lift you out of that, but without the jitters or all of that caffeine crash that some people may experience. That is where the supporter of today's podcast comes in, Mud Water, and it is spelled MUDWTR. So Mud Water. It is a popular coffee alternative, and Mud Water will blend cacao with varied mushrooms, and it has only a fraction of the caffeine of a cup of coffee, but it provides this. It's a really interesting, just sort of natural lift is the best way I can describe it. It's very pleasant, and it has been working a treat for me. It also has all of the things that you want. It is 100% USDA certified organic. It is non-GMO, gluten-free, vegan, and kosher. If you would like to get a free offer, most people do, you can get a free frother, and that's one of those implements that you put in and it creates that lovely sort of froth on the top of your drink. And you can get some free samples of the coconut creamer. You can just go on over to Mud Water, that is MUDWTR.com/Matt Walker. You will get the freebies. So again, that is MUDWTR.com/Matt Walker, and you will get your free frother and your free coconut creamer. Okay, let's get back to the show.
The next question is very interesting. I never thought about it before. What is the stuff that is formed in your eyes during sleep, and does it affect sleep?
I love our listeners. So, okay, the stuff that forms in your eyes.
I
I
don't
know.
even think I know the word for it in English.
So it turns out that the stuff that forms in the corner of your eyes is colloquially known as eye gunk, or I think in America, I think it's like a gooper or something, which I thought was a fish. But anyway, let's just say eye gunk or eye goop for a second. Scientifically, it has a name, and surprise, surprise, it's not called eye gunk or eye goop.
Too bad.
Yeah, it is called rheum. So Rheum, rheum. And what on earth is that stuff, the goop, composed of, you may ask? By the way, at this point, if people are listening to this on their way to work and they've had their breakfast, it's probably starting to have reactive vomiting as I'm speaking about eye goop. But the eye gunk or the goop or the rheum, it's actually made of stardust from the Milky Way.
What now?
I'm kidding you. I'm kidding you.
You're just
Uh,
testing to see if I'm
I'm,
listening.
I'm just seeing if you're awake. Actually more to the point, Ezzy. We should probably be testing to see if anyone is awake as they've been listening to this because
If
losing
they're
the will to live.
driving and you just said stardust.
Maybe it's brought them back, and I'm not referring to the wonderful late David Bowie, but no, room eye goop. It is made up of a combination of things. It's made up of mucus. It is made up of dead skin cells, can you believe? And it's also made up of some oils. And I'm going to get particularly displeasurable in my declarative sentences here, but if you ever stick your finger up into the corner of your eye, you pull out the eye goop, and it's sort of not quite the crusty type, which I'll come on to. Can't believe I'm discussing the crusty. When you kind of rub it between your fingers, if you do this, firstly, your partner, if you're lucky to have one, if they see you doing that, they're going to look at you and they're going to say, I have never wanted you more. That's the first thing.
Of
The
course.
second, the second thing is that when you squish it between your fingers, you'll sort of feel that it's actually quite oily in its texture. And that in part is because it's made up of some of these oils. So where does it come from? Well, maybe in some theoretical sense, I suppose it does come from the stars and the
True.
Milky Way. But stop, Matthew. So rheum is actually produced by the lacrimal glands, which people listening will actually know by a different name. It's just the fancy term of what we call your tear glands. It also comes from the conjunctiva of the eye, but for the most part, it's coming from those tear glands. And the conjunctiva, some people will say, or conjunctiva, that's the membrane that lines the eyelids and sort of covers, for the most part, the majority of the white of your eyeballs. But I'm drifting now. But focusing on coming back to the question, if I've told you what it is, and I've told you what it's made up of, and I've told you where it comes from, then the question is why? Why does it build up mostly at night? And how on earth does it relate to your sleep quantity or your sleep quality? Does it reflect something about the quality of your sleep? Does it harm or damage your sleep if you've got some of that the next morning? Is your sleep score on your sleep tracker going to be robustly worse when you've been noticing eye goop or rheum in the corner of your eye? Well, the primary function of some of the basic elements that I described earlier, so things such as the mucus and some of the oils, these are the things that I described earlier. Those things normally protect and lubricate your eyes. During the waking hours, blinking in addition helps spread tears evenly across the surface of your eyes. If you've ever thought about why do I blink and what is the function of that, you probably thought, well, it's because if I don't blink, I get very dry eyes. And in part, that's true, but it also distributes that tear solution evenly, nicely, almost like a windscreen wiper, I suppose. It does that nicely during the day. How many times have you seen people blinking furiously at night during sleep? And it doesn't happen so much. Normally, when we're awake during the day and we're blinking and we're wiping that tear fluid across the eye, it takes all of the ingredients that I was just describing that build up to produce rheum, and it essentially just removes them away into the tear ducts. And that's why it's very rare during the day that you will get a buildup of this stuff in the corner of your eyes. But of course, at night, our eyelids close, but we do stop blinking. So we're not distributing the tear fluid over the eye as much. And the absence of the blinking of your eyes during sleep at night allows the accumulation of more of this material in your eyes, and where it aggregates is right there in the tear duct. So that explains exactly what it is, what it's made up of, why it occurs in the morning after a night of sleep, and why it doesn't strangely occur across the waking day. The final question is, does it change your sleep? And should you be rather alarmed by any evidence then if you wake up with these eye goop things in the corner of your eyes? No. You don't need to worry. The production of rheum at night, it's a perfectly natural process, and in almost every case, I would say it has no direct effect on the quantity of your sleep and the quality of your sleep. The only time that could cause a problem is when you get excessive rheum production, and particularly of two main types. Turns out that you can have two different flavors of this rheum. Actually, flavors is a terrible notion. Let's stay away from that. But one of those types can create a form of inflammation in the eye, and it can lead to a blocking, and that discomfort of the eyes can disrupt the sleep. Overall, I would say that no one has to really be worried about whether or not, if you wake up in the morning and you've got these things in your eyes, does that mean that I'm not sleeping well? Does it indicate anything? I should probably mention, by the way, what do you do about it when you wake up in the morning and you've got rheum in the corner of your eyes? Perfectly normal. What should you do about it? Well, cleaning away rheum, it's pretty simple. It's just part of regular hygiene. Just use, a damp washcloth and gently remove any buildup in the corner of the eyes. That's typically sufficient. Sometimes, depending the rheum, and this is going to get really displeasurable, but it can get a bit crusty and it can get a bit hard to remove. If that's the case, just use a little bit warmer temperature of water and just damp the cloth against the eyes. Don't start rubbing it furiously across your eyes and your eyeball. Don't go scratching stuff in your eyes. I've inadvertently done that myself, and the only thing that was more displeasurable than the discomfort to my eyes was the degree of profanity that was matching my stupidity by having done that to my eyes. There is a short whirlwind, weird and wonderful world tour of this stuff
Goop
called
tour.
eye goop. Yeah, exactly. Or rheum, which is a perfectly normal situation.
I would say that if you find yourself blinking throughout the night, then that's something to think about. But yeah, if you just have goop, you're perfectly fine.
Yes, indeed. And also, by the way, if you are doing that observational technique to see if your partner, if you're lucky enough to have a bed partner who is blinking, just be sure that they don't wake up and see you hanging right above them, over the top of them, checking to see if you're blinking. That can sometimes, at least I've experienced, can sometimes cause rifts in one's relationship.
Especially when holding a phone in their face.
Yeah, taking pictures. I suppose being a card carrying sleep scientist, I've always got a vague out, but I will just say that it is disconcerting at best and slightly antisocial at worst.
Whatever happens in bed should stay in bed.
One of the partners of today's podcast is Levels. And Levels is a really remarkable company, and it helps you see how food affects your health, and you can track your blood sugar levels both during the day and, thankfully for someone like me who is sleep obsessed, you can also track it throughout the night. I started using Levels, it was probably about 2 years ago now, because I wanted to understand how my body's response to what I was eating, moment to moment, was impacting my sleep. I can very much say from personal experience, it's been so informative and quite powerfully enlightening. It's changed both what I eat in general, but especially what I eat in the evenings at a circadian time when
I already knew that your body was less efficient at regulating blood sugar. And that was really interesting to see exactly that effect in my own levels data and then change how I was eating. And for me, it's not only about exploring my sleep and my blood glucose, but doing this with the continued desire to try to de risk unwanted health conditions such as diabetes and obesity that are linked to poor blood sugar control. Head over to their website and check it out for yourself. Would you like a discount? If so, you will get 2 free months of levels. And all you have to do is just use the link levels, that's LEVELS, levels.link/Matt Walker. Again, that's levels.link/Matt Walker. There is a discount waiting for you. And now, let's get back to the show.
All right, next question. You are going to love our listeners even more. This is a very interesting question. Does masturbation affect sleep?
Did you do that segue deliberately? That whatever happens in bed stays in bed when it comes to sleep? Okay.
Naturally, just happened.
Masturbation. Okay. So I'll try not to repeat too much because I have done a podcast on sex and sleep before. Sex and sleep, sleep and sex, they are intimately and bidirectionally related. And as I said, I did a very wide ranging episode on this. As my good friend, Dr. Wendy Troxel, who's probably the leading expert in this field, would remind me, she's often said that sleep is the new sex. And we've understood that it is quite the combination. And I will come back to masturbation in just a second. Who thinks that they're ever going to say that in public? Before I get to masturbation, let me start with ... words I thought I would never utter. So, in the direction, firstly, of does sleep help sex? I should start there because I said it's bidirectional. Sleep can help sex, sex can help sleep, and understanding some of the mechanisms will help us understand my protracted and delayed answer to sleep and masturbation. So, firstly, what we've discovered is that certain sex hormones are boosted when we are getting better sleep, including things like testosterone in both men and women. And by the way, testosterone is essential for women. It's obviously, of course, essential to men, also key for women. But when a man or a woman is sleeping well relative to when they're not sleeping well, testosterone levels are normalized, if not optimized. And then estrogen in women is also superior. It's more optimized again. In fact, when you flip that, if you limit, for example, a man to about 5 hours, a healthy young man to 5 hours of sleep for about a week, they will have testosterone levels that are probably equivalent to someone maybe 10 to 12 years their senior. So it affects males. It also affects females. A lack of sleep will decrease and disrupt levels of estrogen, progesterone, and also follicle stimulating hormone. Sleep can help sex in that sense, in the way that it boosts sex related hormones. But there's more to it that, for example, women who are sleeping more will report greater sensitivity of their genitals, in part, we believe, because of the increased boost in estrogen that occurs with superior sleep. That leads to greater vaginal lubrication. And that's another reason why you can see that greater reported sensitivity and pleasure from intimacy with their partner when sleep is higher. We also know an interesting feature about libido, and there's a great study, and I'm blanking, oh my goodness, on the first author. It will probably come back to me. But what they discovered is that for every extra hour of sleep that a woman reported getting, there was a 14% increase in the desire of that woman to be sexually intimate with her partner. And just to put that in context, the FDA approved libido medications for women, things such as Vyleesi, and there's a second one, which again, I'm blanking on the name of. Those can increase female libido by about 24% if you look at the randomized controlled trials. Yet here, the simple addition of 1 hour of extra sleep can get you 50%, if not more, of the way there, and that's a drug free. approach.
So you meant
Uh,
40? 40?
Sorry, no. 1/4. So that's why I was saying it gets you almost 50% of the way there
Ah,
relative to the pharmacology of things like Vyleesi, that libido drug, which can increase it up to 24%.
got
So
it.
obviously significantly higher, but 1 hour of sleep, 14%, not trivial. Someone, I think I mentioned that stat on a podcast, and someone sent me this TikTok or an Instagram, something, comedian guy, I think. And it was me with that very short statement. And then it goes back to him and he's driving in his car and he's on a phone call with his wife. He just sort of said, "Darling, tonight we're going to get you to bed early." And she's saying, What's going on? He said, "No, at least an hour, at least an hour." And then it cuts back to me doing it. And whoever it was, the timing was, he just had such impact. If anyone can find that thing, it's a TikTok or an Instagram. It was like a meme on what I'd said. It was so genius. It was brilliant.
That's
Anyway,
wonderful.
so those are a few things about sleep improving sex. But of course, it's a two-way street, and sex, as well as masturbation, can also improve sleep. Very much so for sex and masturbation, with a caveat, particularly for the sex part. And I'm not going to stereotypically point the finger at any males, sorry, any one sex in particular. But what we found is that consensual sex, and here's the caveat, so long as it results in orgasm, is associated with at least two well documented sleep benefits. First, what we see on average is that sex that accomplishes orgasm is associated with a 70% increase in self reported sleep quality afterwards. And secondly, people report falling asleep significantly faster following sex that accomplishes orgasm. I don't know if people have really done enough studies to look at just the aspect of the beautiful intimacy that comes with lovemaking too, which I suspect also has some sleep benefits. And so I'm not trying to be overly emphatic and emphasize this need for orgasm, because I think there's a lot of wonderful clinicians in the field of sexual health who will rightly point out that that shouldn't necessarily be the focus, but it's just been the focus in the sleep studies. So I'm just being descriptive of the studies rather than an opinion. I just want to make that clear. But clearly, what we found is that sex with orgasm has a soporific benefit. It seems to be a sleep aid. If it is, why is that? I'll come back to that in a second, because it's actually common between both the sex with orgasm and the masturbation. Let me come on to masturbation. So, to the question of masturbation, don't worry if you are single, because it turns out that masturbation can be a reasonable stand in here. What we found is that masturbation resulting in orgasm is associated with a 47% increase in sleep quality and a 50% reduction in the time that it takes someone to fall asleep. So, not as impactful as intercourse with orgasm. Remember, that was a 70% increase in self reported sleep quality. Masturbation brings you in at 47%, but still a sizable benefit that rests in your own hands, so to speak, no pun intended. But anyway, crashing on, Matthew, crashing on.
We're breaking
What's
records from Goop to.
Oh God, I mean, the great questions, but I do find myself being British uncomfortable. But it's really interesting. If you look at the data, it's not unusual for people to have long known this, and they will report using masturbation to help them if they are struggling with sleep. So individuals will use it as a natural sleep aid if they are not finding it easy to fall asleep, and they will use masturbation in that toolkit to try to help promote a faster sleep onset. So, if that is sex and masturbation, and clearly both of them seem to aid in sleep, the question then becomes mechanism. Exactly how are these things operating as natural sleep aids? Surprisingly, there's been a lot of work to explore this. And there are at least perhaps 5 or 6 different mechanisms that have been uncovered that help us. By the way, is it just me? in every one of these AMAs and probably at the sleep center, and when I'm working with you folks there, do I seem to always number every scientific explanation that I offer in lab and also to the public? I think I may do.
I think it's just the way that you have such great memory. So this is kind of how you bucket your knowledge. I like it.
Again, such a diplomatic answer, but I fear that, oh goodness, I'm now going to have to ask friends or past significant others to say, like, was life with me basically just a list of numeric items that, good
You
morning,
should
darling.
be.
How
How
was your
would you
day?
break your bed?
Well, yeah, number one, it was number two, coming on to number three. So, okay,
You should be
here we,
proud of your memory. It's amazing.
uh,
You
it's,
remember everything you read, and you read so much.
sometimes I really wish I could forget some stuff because goodness knows there's so much useless stuff that is like trapped in my brain and the synapses that are there. Although then there's some beautiful stuff too. It's funny. I was just I don't know why I was driving the other day and I was reflecting back on a wonderful interview on a podcast that I had with one of the most beautiful, special human beings on this planet, a guy called Lex Friedman. I'm sure lots of people know of him and listen to his podcast, which is spectacular. I think he gets a lot of flack that he doesn't deserve. He's the most kind, generous, beautiful human being, one of them that I know. And I remember when I went down to record the podcast with him, we met in the lobby of a hotel. The memory, I was just thinking as I was driving, I know exactly what he was wearing, and no big surprise because he wears the same thing, but I can recall exactly what shoes he was wearing, and I could remember exactly how his laces were laced up. You know how different people lace their shoes in different ways? I can tell you that his white shirt was not necessarily a smooth white cotton, but it had a pattern to it in its stitched knit. And I was driving along thinking, it's
Wow.
absolutely useless information. That serves no purpose at all, both for me and certainly not for Lex. It's so odd. So that's what I'm saying. It's not always, much as I'd love to recall the memories that I shared with Lex there, I could do with some defragging of my hard drive, I think what I'm saying. Anyway, I haven't
You should
forgotten.
have been
I
a
said,
detective, Matt.
there's a lot of things that I definitely should not be, but
You know how
coming back
many shows that
to
the breakthrough moment was figuring out that the laces were off.
I know. I'm
That's
thinking,
the way it goes.
you've seen House, the television series, and Hugh Laurie, brilliant actor, plays that role so well. And essentially, he's just got this insane memory and he just remembers everything and knows everything. How functional is that character in that television series? Welcome to Matthew's World. Coming back to it, folks, I mentioned sleep and I mentioned sex and masturbation. How is it that sex and masturbation with orgasm help sleep? I said that there were 6 reasons. Let me see if I can remember them. The first is that when there is sex and masturbation followed by orgasm, there is the release of 2 hormones that enhance sleep. The first is called oxytocin, and that release is stronger in women, although it is present to a lesser degree in men. And oxytocin has a sleep enhancing, it has a soporific nature and benefit to it. But in men, the principal hormone that is released that is sleep inducing following orgasm is something called vasopressin. I should note that that vasopressin story is still sort of emerging. Number 2, there is a release of something that we call endocannabinoids following sex with orgasm. So, a lot of people have heard of cannabinoids and things like cannabis. Well, as I've mentioned on this show before, we produce our own forms of cannabinoids inside of our body, naturally occurring. Hence, they are called endo, meaning coming from inside, endocannabinoids. And they are released following orgasm, and they also will help sleep. Number 3, following orgasm, post-coitally, there is a switch over from what we call the sympathetic nervous system, which is the branch of your nervous system that is very active during very activated experiences, things such as stress or fear, but also activated very much to keep you activated during the act of sex. And the opposite to the sympathetic nervous system, and it's anything but sympathetic, it's very activating indeed, is something that we call the parasympathetic nervous system. You need a switch over to the parasympathetic nervous system if you are to fall asleep. And if you are too sympathetic and not enough parasympathetic, you can be as sleepy as you will like, but you will not fall asleep. And this is why, in the context of stress, we see people having what we call the tired but wired phenomenon, where they'll say, look, I am just so tired, but I'm so wired that I can't fall asleep. What they're describing is that their nervous system is switched over into this sort of activated sympathetic state, and it can't switch over into the parasympathetic state. But when we have sex or masturbation followed by orgasm, it helps push us over into that parasympathetic state, and sleep becomes easier. Next up, I am going to go with neurochemicals again to keep it consistent, since I've been talking about chemicals so far. Sexual activity and orgasm will trigger the release of what we call endorphins and also serotonin. And serotonin and obviously endorphins, they produce a sense of well-being. And that sense of well-being, that post-coital sense of well-being satisfaction almost, can induce a state that is conducive to sleep. And also the increase in serotonin acts as a precursor to the sleep regulating hormone, which is melatonin, which can help the timing of sleep. And that's why perhaps people are falling asleep faster, because they are getting a stronger melatonin sleep triggering signal. And therefore you get what we call reduced sleep latency after sex, meaning the time it takes you to fall asleep, the latency, the time is reduced. So that's the fourth one.
You can
The
get some of
final,
those after exercise too, right?
you can indeed. And those two things certainly are produced by exercise. And I should do a show on the timing of exercise, because one of the myths out there is that you shouldn't exercise, 2 or 3 hours before bed. If you look at the data, you can get a lot closer. It's the same with eating, in fact, too. Again, if you're doing it right before bed, exercising or eating vast amounts right before bed, neither of those things are going to help you sleep. We know that. But the notion that they have to be cut off many, many hours before you expect to sleep doesn't seem to be entirely true, but I'm drifting here. I'll come on to the final two. I've spoken about four so far, and these two are really less about chemicals. The first is psychological relaxation, that sex and sexual satisfaction and emotional intimacy, they can lead to a state of mental relaxation, of reduced stress and reduced anxiety. And stress and anxiety are so often the barriers to falling asleep quickly. And when they are removed because of that state of, what's a nicer word? Maybe it's a state of mental equanimity that is reached
I like that.
after sex and masturbation that follows with orgasm. It does remove those barriers, decreases stress and anxiety, sleep arrives faster. The final is perhaps a little bit more, it comes back to your comment on exercise, which is energy expenditure. Physical exertion associated with sexual activity can lead to a natural state of fatigue, and fatigue can lead to individuals naturally falling asleep faster. That may be less so for masturbation, and I'm not casting any judgment as to how people masturbate relative to how they have sex. But I will simply say that that's probably the sixth ingredient. There's probably many more to that, but those are the six that just sort of, how when you're at a train station and the board quickly changes and it just flips out. Those are the six most obvious that all of a sudden collided onto my train board of mechanistic explanations. I hope that that's helpful. So there is sex and masturbation in a nutshell when it comes to sleep.
I love how we discussed that notion of exercising before sleep or not, but in a way, people have been doing light exercises before sleep for many, many years.
If they had not, there would be no human race at this point.
Exactly.
And on that note, we will leave it there, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. E.T., thank you for guiding and navigating this. For people wanting to hear more of the wonderful voice of Dr. E.T. Ben Simone, E.T., where can people find you if they want to look you up?
I have a website, sleepingeti.com. Please come read about the work. My Twitter is Etoosh, Etoosh.
You can find me on Twitter, on Instagram, even on TikTok now. Feel free to send me social media requests. Share your questions and we will upload them, and we will look to see the high frequency requested items, and we will load them into the top order for the next forthcoming AMAs. So as ever, I will thank you, the audience, for listening. Thank Etty, my wonderful co-pilot, for these episodes, and say take care. Bye for now. Thanks very much.